Hey guys, tonight we slip back into a world blanketed in darkness where the sun sets early and doesn't bother returning until weeks or even months later. You're wrapped in a fur you didn't pick out, tucked inside a long, creaking wooden house shared with 30 other people and 2 goats. You can hear the wind outside scraping across the icy fields like claws on a wooden door, and the air inside your nose stings with cold soot and the faint smell of turnip stew from earlier. This is a Viking winter. It's not just cold, it's a kind of deep, bone-weary silence interrupted only by coughing, snoring, and someone grumbling about their frozen boots. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive this. Not without central heating, double-paned windows, or at the very least, a hot water bottle named Greg. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what time it is. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stir the ashes of the central hearth with a carved stick, nudging the last glowing embers until they breathe a little heat into the chilled air. It's not much, just enough to warm your fingers for a heartbeat. Outside, the world is black and still. Snow drifts like powdered wool past the thick wooden walls of your longhouse, and the roof timbers creak with the weight of it. There's no moon tonight. Just cold stars that seem to watch with judgment. Winter isn't just a season here in the Viking world, it's practically a second personality. It sneaks into your boots, curls up under your skin, and whispers through the cracks in the wood. The Norse didn't measure cold in degrees. They measured it by what froze first, your breath, your hair, or your hope. You step around a sleeping figure, careful not to kick anyone. It's hard to tell who's who beneath all those bundled cloaks and shared furs. Someone groans in their sleep. A child coughs. A sheep bleats softly, annoyed by the lack of personal space. The longhouse itself is narrow and low, designed to trap what little warmth you can summon. The ceiling is dark with soot, the air heavy with the smell of wool, wood smoke, old cheese, and damp feet. Charming, really. This isn't a castle or a fortress. It's a shared home, a long rectangle of timber and turf, with raised platforms along the sides where people sleep shoulder to shoulder, like pickles in a barrel. At the centre, the hearth. Not some grand fireplace with glowing logs and crackling pine. No, this is just a smouldering pit of charcoal and smoke that sometimes works and sometimes just makes you cry. You sit on a rough woolen mat, rubbing your hands together. Your fingers are stiff wooden, almost, but you're used to that now. Everyone is. You can't even remember what it feels like to stretch without wincing. That's just Viking winter life. And it's only November. You chew on a bit of dried fish. It's salty, leathery, and tastes like regret, but it fills your stomach and gives your jaw something to do while you wait for the fire to be coaxed back into existence. The older woman beside you, the one with the braid like a twisted rope, mumbles in her sleep and tightens her grip on a sleeping dog. Smart choice. Those dogs are warmer than people. You glance toward the entrance flap. It's been sewn shut with strips of rawhide from the inside to keep out the wind. Beyond that is the outhouse, buried somewhere under a snowbank. You sincerely hope you won't need it tonight. Not unless you enjoy crawling through knee-high drifts with your trousers down. Still, you can't help but feel a strange sense of comfort. You're not alone in this chill. Around you, 30 other bodies generate enough shared heat to keep death at the door, but only just. The people of this house, your kin or your neighbors, breathe and shift and snore softly beside you. You hear someone mutter in their dreams, and then the room is still again, wrapped in that thick Viking silence. You try to relax your shoulders. They've been hunched all day from hauling wood and dragging meat inside before it froze solid. But relaxing in Viking winter is like trying to nap in a cave full of mildly annoyed badgers. It can be done, but you have to earn it. And just as you begin to drift, the old man across the hearth starts snoring like a drowning moose. Of course. You roll over and pull your cloak tighter, the fur tickling your nose. You can still smell the last stew cooked in the communal pot: turnips, barley, and something suspiciously chewy. It wasn't delicious, but it was hot. And hot is a luxury you don't question. There's an old saying among the Norse that a fire is worth more than gold on a winter night. But here's the thing: firewood is heavy. It has to be chopped, hauled, and protected from dampness. So while the hearth fire is sacred, it's not always roaring. It's often low, smoky, and stubborn. Sometimes it dies in the night, and you wake up wondering if your toes are still attached. And here's your quirky tidbit for the evening. Some Viking families hung more stones over the half-flat rocks they heated by the fire and slipped into their bedding like primitive hot water bottles. They burned your thighs if you weren't careful, but hey, warmth is pain. Historians still argue whether those early bed-warming stones were actually standard across Norse settlements or just a quirky trend in a few frostier regions. But regardless, you'd gladly shove a glowing rock under your knees right about now if it meant not waking up with icicles in your beard. A baby fusses quietly at the far end of the longhouse. Her mother soothes her with gentle humming, a lullaby passed down from her own mother's mother. It sounds like wind through trees and the creak of ship timber, soft, slow, and ancient. You listen, not understanding the words, but feeling them all the same. This is how the night begins. Not with silence, but with sound muffled and slow, like the heartbeat of the house itself. Everyone breathes together, wrapped in shared blankets and the mutual hope that tomorrow won't be colder than today. You pull your cloak over your head, settle your hands beneath your armpits, and tuck your knees to your chest. It's going to be a long night. But you've made it this far. And somehow, the dark doesn't feel quite as empty when you're surrounded by the living warmth of others. Not dead yet. That's something. You wake before the light, not that there's much of it to look forward to this time of year. The Viking sun is lazy and Winterit rises late, if at all, and dribbles across the sky like someone spilled pale ale on a parchment map. You shift beneath the itchy wool of your cloak and immediately regret it. The cold has seeped into your bones overnight. Your toes are small, frozen mysteries inside. They're wool wrappings. Your breath hangs in the air like ghost mist. And the fur blanket, damp with the sweat of survival. Romantic? No. Still, you rise, creaking like an old ship. Because that's what people do here. Not out of cheer, but necessity. The cold doesn't care how tired you are. First order of the day. Getting dressed. Not in them. What should I wear? Sense. This is a full military operation. Layers. Lots of them. You start with a linen undertunic, slightly stiff from last week's wash done, of course, in a stream colder than forgiveness. Over that, a thick woolen tunic in murky brown. It smells vaguely of goat, but that's almost comforting now. You reach for your best defense, furs. You wrap a sheepskin over your shoulders, tie it tight with a leather strap, and shove your feet into shoes that are more patched than original material. These aren't fashion choices. These are survival statements. Now, here's something odd. Before you even think of stepping outside or sitting near the hearth, you grease your exposed skin. That's right. You rub yourself down with animal fat, seal, bear, or pig, depending on what's on hand. Because lard acts like nature's windbreaker. It traps heat, repels moisture, and gives you a charming, glistening sheen that screams rugged Norse glamour. One of your housemates eyes you with sleepy amusement as you smear the stuff across your cheeks. She raises an eyebrow. You shrug. It's lard season. Again. Even children are taught to apply fat to their ears and noses before venturing out. Sure, it makes cuddling awkward and kissing a bit like wrestling a greasy eel, but hey, it beats frostbite. Historians still argue whether the Vikings actually used fat daily for warmth or reserved it for extreme outings, like ship journeys or foraging missions. But in the sagas of survival, lard definitely plays a starring role. And tonight, you're not taking chances. Across the room, someone else is wrapping cloth around their legs. Well, socks, leg binders. Long woolen bands wrapped from ankle to knee, criss-crossed for both warmth and support. Think of them as ancient thermal leggings with attitude. You do the same, grateful for the friction-based heat it generates. Dressing takes time, and that's intentional. The longer you move, the warmer you get. No one sits still here. The cold rewards action. By now, more figures are rising in the dim morning light. Some groan. Some sigh. One man curses softly as he struggles to pull on a tunic stiff with frost. You stifle a chuckle. His beard is frozen into delicate icicles, and he looks like an angry snow god. There's a quiet camaraderie to this awkward, bundled-up parade. Everyone smells a little like smoked meat and unwashed wool. But no one minds. It's part of the ambience. You glance over at the fur wall hanging near the fire pit. It's been rigged up to block the worst of the draft coming from a crack in the plank wall. Clever. You remember when someone used a whole deer, helt last yearlings and all. It looked like the beast had decided to retire and become a tapestry. There's something uniquely humbling about life in this climate. You don't fight the cold. You bargain with it. You trick it. You wrap yourself in it until it thinks you're one of its own. You notice the children now, waking slowly under mounds of wool and straw. Their hair is a tousled mess, their cheeks flushed with cold sleep. They get dressed fast, hands shaking slightly as they pull on 2 big mittens and knot scarves around their necks. One of them pauses to pet a dog curled beside the fire, a living hot water bottle with fleas. Outdoors, the wind howls. The door flap bulges inward slightly. You can see snow creeping in through the edges, tiny flakes swirling like spies. You won't be going far today. The world outside is locked in white silence, and even the bravest of souls knows better than to wander without purpose. But you do need to fetch more firewood soon. That stack by this arse. It's shrinking faster than your patience. The thought of stepping outside makes you pause. So, you do a mental inventory. Tunics. Ech. Leg binders. Ech. Cloak. Double check. Fur hat that makes you look like a fashionable badger. Sadly. Yes. Lard. Shiny and ready. You're dressed like a hero in a saga if that hero mostly chopped ice and tripped over goats. Now, for your quirky tidbit of the evening, some Viking women sew tiny pockets of herbs into their winter tunics not for fragrance, but for warmth. Mugwort, in particular, was believed to stimulate circulation. So yes, the original Viking life hack was carry a pouch of spicy weeds in your armpit. A bold choice, but desperate times finally, you grab your mitten scraps of felted wool stitched together with gut string. They're mismatched, of course. Everyone's are. But they work, and that's what matters. Your breath fogs again as you move toward the fire. It's crackling now, fed with fresh pine and a few precious chips of driftwood. A small success. Warmth, at last. You crouch beside it, extend your hands, and sigh as the feeling slowly returns to your fingertips. Today won't be easy. None of them are. But you're armored in wool and grit, coated in lard and stuffed into more layers than a stuffed goose. The cold may be cruel, but you're more stubborn than it is. And that, more than anything else, is how the Vikings survived. You're kneeling by the hearth now, staring at it the way one might stare at a grumpy cat hoping it doesn't go out, but knowing full well it probably will. The fire is the heart of the longmouse, but let's be clear, it's a fickle, smoky, stinging, cough-inducing heart. This isn't your fairy tale fireplace with logs snapping cheerfully beneath a stone mantel. This is a shallow pit in the middle of a dirt floor, ringed with blackened stones and a few carefully placed iron tools. It's been burning all night sorta, but mostly just smouldering under a heap of ash and half-hearted embers. You poke at it with a stick, trying to coax life from the glow. The trick is not to smother it. Add too much fuel too fast, and you'll get smoke. Just smoke. The kind that blinds and chokes and makes the entire longhouse sound like a tubercular choir. And yet, without it, you freeze. You gently place a pine knot on top of the embers, then blow softly. A flicker. A sigh of orange. There we go. The fire catches slowly, reluctantly, like a tired old man being asked to stand up too quickly. But it burns. It burns. The smoke rises directly upward into nothing. No chimney. Just a smoke hole carved into the center of the roof, designed to let out the worst of the fumes, except that today it's partially blocked by a slab of ice. Naturally, you wave the smoke away with your mitten. Your eyes water. The child sneezes. Now, here's where the hearth becomes more than just a heater. It's the glue of Viking domestic life. People gather here to eat, mend clothes, dry their feet, and warm whatever body part is closest to frostbite. It's also where conversations happen. Stories. Songs. Light gossip about how Olaf's beard froze to his tankard yesterday. You lean in close, warming your hands just inches above the coals. The heat doesn't travel far. You feel it on your palms, but your back is still cold, your nose still drips, and your feet might as well be carved from ice. This is a very localized warmth, like trying to heat a room with a birthday candle. Still, it's enough to get you moving. One of the women begins to stir a pot suspended above the flames. It's the same pot used for everything: stew, broth, dye, porridge. At this point, it probably has its own ecosystem. Today's breakfast smells like barley, leeks, and last night's lamb bones. Not exciting, but filling. You sit nearby, waiting for your turn with a wooden bowl that still carries the faint aroma of burnt onions from 3 days ago. Someone coughs. Someone farts. Someone breaks into a soft hum. Morning in the Viking world. And then you hear the unmistakable pop of pine's sap-catching flame. A small whoosh, a spark, and a sudden crackle. The fire's truly awake now. You sigh in relief. That sound is survival. That sound means toes get to stay attached today. Let's pause here for a quirky historical nugget. Vikings sometimes hung tiny bells or carved charms above the hearth, not for decoration, but for protection. They believed spirits lingered around the fire, helpful ones and mischievous ones. The charms kept things peaceful, or at least kept spirits too annoyed to do harm. Imagine, your survival depends on keeping both embers and elves in good temper. Historians still argue whether these hearth guardians were more pagan holdovers or just local superstition, but one thing's certain: when your only light and heat source might burn out by nightfall, you hedge your bets with charms, prayers, and anything else handy. You glance up at the rafters. Hanging herbs dangle. They're dried juniper, rosemary, and some mysterious leafy thing that smells like old socks but wards off evil, apparently. The smoke curls around them gently. That's the other benefit of a fire. Aside from heat, smoke preserves. It drives away insects, cures meats, and even deters some of the less welcome house guests, lice, fleas, marriageable uncles. The smoke hole finally gives way with a small wet plop, and a chilly shaft of grey light beams down from the roof. You can see the flakes dancing in the air, spinning like tiny ghosts in the haze. It's beautiful, in a bleak kind of way. But don't get too dreamy. Your job now is to keep the fire going. That means rotating the logs, adjusting the iron pot chain, and making sure no one dumps wet wood into the flames like they did yesterday. Looking at you. Jawn. The longhouse may look sturdy, but it leaks warmth like a sieve. The thick timber walls help, sure, but insulation isn't exactly high-tech. There's moss stuck into the cracks, straw piled along the baseboards, fur drapes hung over particularly bad drafts. Every little bit helps, but you're still very much living inside a glorified wooden sock. And so, the hearth becomes your anchor. You notice now how people move closer to it, slowly, like pilgrims. No one talks much yet, words are expensive before breakfast, but there's a soft gratitude in the way they hold out their hands, lean back with closed eyes, and soak in what little heat there is. It's not warm, not really. But it's enough. Enough to believe in the day ahead. Enough to believe that winter, long as it is, won't last forever. And there's a certain peace in that. You feel it in the hush that settles over the room, in the steam rising from the pot, in the dull gleam of coals that refuse to die. The hearth is small, humble, and kind of pathetic compared to modern heat. But it's alive. And so, why you? Just barely, maybe, but alive is enough. You shuffle back from the hearth, bowl in hand, barley stew warming your fingers. The smell clings to your sleeves, wood smoke, leaks, and just a hint of goat, but it's oddly comforting now. Like you've finally accepted that in Viking winter, you are going to smell like stew. There's no winning that particular battle. The others are already settling back into their sleeping spots, though calling them beds might be a bit generous. They're more like nests, low platforms, or straw-padded floor mats arranged in a long row along either wall of the longhouse, stacked with woolen cloaks, fur throws, and occasionally a rogue sock or chicken. Your spot is somewhere in the middle. Which is strategic. The ends of the longhouse are colder. The middle gets the most residual heat from the hearth, and perhaps more importantly, it's also farthest from the door, which is still frozen shut and rattling faintly in the wind like a ghost trying to respay. You step carefully between bodies. Some folks are already curled back up, hunched into balls, noses, tucked beneath cloaks. One child is still snoring into a sheepskin. A man with an impressive beard that could double as a squirrel's winter home is muttering in his sleep. And then comes the real Viking sleeping arrangement strategy, the blanket of bodies. You ease yourself down onto your straw pallet and slowly wedge yourself back into the living wall of humanity. To your right, a woman you barely know, but who shares excellent foot-warming abilities. To your left, a very round uncle who radiates heat like a well-fed seal. No one complains. Personal space is a modern luxury. Here, warmth means everything. And that means cuddling with whoever's handy, humans, animals, and sometimes both at once. The awkwardness disappears after the first week. Or at least, you pretend it does. The furs are pulled back over the group like a heavy, communal lid. Someone grumbles as a knee pokes into their side. Someone else shifts their legs to make room for the dog, who seems to be the only one actually comfortable. You arrange your cloak under your head, rest the wooden bowl by your feet, and sigh. Your toes press against someone's calves, possibly human. It's too cold to care. You're all in this meat burrito together. Here's a little-known fact. Vikings rarely slept alone in winter. Even married couples might find themselves with children, elders, visitors, and livestock sharing the space. Privacy took a long vacation during the frozen months. Now for your quirky tidbit, some households even kept hens inside the longhouse overnight, not just for eggs or warmth, but because their body heat helped raise the room temperature just enough. Plus, the gentle clucking helped people sleep. Like feathery white noise machines, but with more judgmental eyes. You try to get comfortable. Your side aches from yesterday's wood hauling. You tuck one arm beneath your tunic to keep it warm and pull your fur up to your chin. You're not asleep. Not really. But you're not awake either. It's a kind of half-dreaming state shared with everyone else. People drift in and out, dozing in short stretches, turning like rotisserie chickens whenever a hip goes numb. This is what historians call segmented sleep, though they still argue whether it was intentional or just a consequence of the cold and darkness. In Viking homes, people often slept in two main shifts, falling asleep after dinner, waking for a while during the middle of the night, then sleeping again until morning. During those wakeful hours, you might pray, mend a sock, talk quietly, or just lie there pretending the dog isn't hogging all the blanket. Someone stirs beside you. The woman with the warm feet mutters a joke under her breath. You both stifle a laugh, not wanting to wake the others. The moment passes. Silence settles again, broken only by the occasional snore, cough, or sharp fart from somewhere deep within the cuddle pile. Ah, community. The truth is, there's a strange coziness to all this closeness. You can feel the breathing of others around you, the gentle rise and fall of sleeping chests. It's like being wrapped in a human heartbeat. Of course, there are rules. Don't move too much. Don't steal the covers. And absolutely don't let your icy feet wander into forbidden territory. The consequences are swift and usually involve a very sharp elbow. Some households create makeshift partitions using heavy curtains or wooden slats for minimal privacy, but in most cases, people just deal. After all, it's only winter for half the year. Eventually, your breathing slows. Your body stops shivering. The shared heat of the people around you, the layers of wool and fur, and the slow warmth from the hearth all combine into a gentle, animal-like comfort. You drift. You dream of green fields and summer meadows, of sunlight on your face and sandals on your feet, of roasted apples and ale that hasn't frozen into a slushy. The kind of dreams that only come to those who have earned them through sheer stubbornness. Shift slightly, adjusting your weight so your hip bone stops stabbing you like a Viking sword. A goat bleats softly in its sleep nearby. Someone coughs. Someone rolls over and mumbles something about herring again. Life goes on, even in the dark. Especially in the dark. And despite the cold, the closeness, and the general lack of deodorant, you feel okay. Better than okay. There's a strange comfort in knowing you're not alone. That dozens of other souls are piled into the same wooden ship, sailing the icy seas of winter together. And tonight, at least, you won't freeze. Not because of your tunic. Not because of the fire, but because of the stranger beside you who didn't push your leg away. The longhouse is still dim when you stir again, caught between dreams of summer meadows and the sharp smell of something boiled. Strongly boiled. Possibly reboiled from yesterday, with a hint of something fishy and mysterious. Yes. Breakfast. You stretch slowly under the communal furs, careful not to jab your neighbor with an elbow. Your knees pop. Your shoulder aches. But there's something that gets you moving every morning more than any rooster ever could. The promise of warm food. The Viking winter diet was not built for variety. It was built for survival. And it starts long before the first snowflake falls. Come harvest season, you salt, dry, pickle and bury enough food to feed your household and all the cats, dogs, guests and livestock you accidentally keep indoors through winter. So you sit up, wrap your cloak around your shoulders, and shuffle back toward the hearth, where the pot is already bubbling. You peer inside. It's barley again, with a bit of dried fish. And oh, look, a surprise turnip chunk. The culinary excitement is nearly overwhelming. But you're not here for flavor. You're here for calories, because the body burns more energy just trying to stay warm. So the Norse winter diet is one long, endless pursuit of fat. Animal fat, dairy fat. Anything that can give you that full-bellied warmth that lingers just long enough to get you through chores without weeping. You ladle some into your bowl and notice the surface shines with a little slick of fat. Beautiful. You've officially developed a taste for things most modern folks would politely decline at a buffet. Greasy stew. Sign you're thriving. You take a bite. It's chewy, warm, slightly fishy. You love it. Someone sits beside you with a chunk of hard cheese and a flat barley cake. Luxury, they mutter, chewing slowly. You nod. You both know that cheese was probably the last one not touched by frost, or mice, or both. Here's a known mainstream fact. The Vikings didn't just eat meat and fish. They ate grains, lots of them. Barley, rye, and oats were staples, often ground into porridge, bread, or thick gruel. And during winter, these starky meals kept people going. But when supplies ran low, say, in late February, things got creative. Stews stretched thinner. Ingredients, let's say, broadened. Old root vegetables, dried herbs, mysterious bits of dried animal sometimes labelled simply as meat, ? And now for your quirky tidbit, some Viking households brewed beer porridge. That's right, porridge made with beer instead of water. Not for the flavour, necessarily, but because beer was often safer to drink than water and the slight alcohol gave you a warm flush. Imagine starting your frosty morning with a buzz and a bowl of fermented oatmeal. Viking brunch? Anyone? You finish your meal, scraping the last bits from the side of the bowl. Not because you're hungry still, but because nothing gets wasted. Someone hands you a bit of dried sausage as bark, but salty and sharp. You chew it for what feels like half a morning, jaw working like a horse grinding oats. At the far end of the longhouse, someone begins preparing the next batch of flatbread, pressing dough between hot stones. It smells of scorched grain and ash. You find it oddly comforting. Smells like survival. Historians still argue whether winter meals were eaten communally or in shifts based on age, rank, or family unit. But in most surviving sagas and archaeological finds, one thing is clear: food was shared. Even if it was barely enough. Even if you had to gnaw through it like a determined beaver. You lean back now, belly full enough to believe you'll make it another day. That warmth from inside a stomach warmth is the secret source of Viking survival. When your toes are cold, you can layer. When your fingers are numb, you can blow on them. But when your insides are warm, you can hope. Someone offers you pickled egg. You politely decline. There are limits. Others pass around skyra, kind of sour, thick Viking yogurt. It's cold, tangy, and suspiciously lumpy. But it's high in protein, and protein equals power, especially when you're chopping firewood in 4 layers of wool. A woman near the hearth takes out a small cloth pouch and adds dried nettle to her stew. Medicinal, she says. Or maybe just to feel fancy. The line between medicine and flavor is thin when you only have 4 ingredients and 2 of them are barley. You smile. There's humor in the struggle. Laughter, even. Someone cracks a joke about yesterday's stew biting back. Another compares their sausage to their uncle's boot. You sip warm broth from your bowl, soaking in the moment. These mealtimes, though simply, are sacred. A time to rest, to recover, and to connect with those around you. Not through philosophical discussion, but through shared chewing and raised eyebrows. The stew has settled in your belly now, spreading warmth outward. You feel it in your chest, in your limbs. Even your fingers seem a little more alive. You run your tongue across your teeth, check for any lingering fish bones, and sigh with the kind of satisfaction only known to those who've eaten the same meal 7 days in a row and still appreciate it. The truth is, Vikings didn't need variety. They needed consistency. Fat, salt, grain, and warmth. That was the dream. The feast. The secret handshake between survival and starvation. And in the quiet that follows breakfast, with steam curling from your bowl and a dozen others around you doing the same, you feel something you didn't expect: gratitude. Not for the stew, or even the sausage, but for the fact that your body is warm again. That you can move. That you can think clearly. That there's enough. Just enough. You finished your breakfast, wiped your bowl with a crust of barley bread, and tucked your cloak around your shoulders again. But don't get too cozy. Because here's the thing no one tells you about surviving Viking winters: you can't just sit still. Not unless you want to turn into a human icicle with excellent posture. So you rise. Slowly. Your knees complain like old floorboards, and your back sounds like someone shuffling firewood. Welcome to Winter Fitness, Norse edition, where the main goal is simply staying alive, and the workout is everything. You begin your morning movement by helping to hang up cloaks by the hearth to dry. They'll still be damp when you wear them again, of course, but at least they'll be warm damp. A key distinction. Then it's on to the sleeping area, where the woolen tents are being adjusted. Yes, tents. Inside. This isn't some quirky Pinterest idea. These are functional little hideaways strung across the sleeping platforms, layers of wool, linen or animal hide draped over cords or wooden beams to make personal sleeping niches within the longhouse. Think of them as early thermal pods. Not private, exactly. You can still hear every snore, and every midnight turnip fart, but they hold heat better than open bedding. And they keep children from rolling directly into the fire, which is always a plus. You help an elder tie off the flap to hers. She pats your hand and mumbles something about better than last year's blizzard, which, from the look in her eye, you suspect involve frostbite and goats in places they shouldn't be. These internal tents are small, just enough for 2 people, maybe 3 children, but once you're inside, the warmth builds fast. Body heat, wool insulation, and shared breath create a microclimate that can mean the difference between sleep and shivers. You step into one now to adjust a corner, and you can feel it, the heat trapped inside. It smells like wool, wood smoke, and faintly of cabbage. But it's warm. It's working. That's all that matters. Now here's your mainstream fact. Vikings didn't use beds the way we do. Most slept on low wooden platforms covered in straw and pelts, often with others. These platforms were sometimes built into the structure itself, raised just off the cold ground to avoid dampness and rodents. And sometimes, like here, people added cloth tents or canopies over them during winter months. You crawl out of the tent and stand again. You stretch. You shiver. You move. Because again, stillness is the enemy. Not just because it makes you cold, but because it messes with your mind. Which brings us to the other half of the Viking winter sleep schedule. Short, scattered shifts. You nap. You rest. But full nights of sleep. Especially when you're wedged between a goat, your cousin, and a sack of onions. So most people here sleep in chunks a few hours at a time, waking up when they need to pee, stoke the fire, or check if their foot still exists. Then they do things. You help someone untangle flax threads. You see a child patching a hole in his mitten with twine. Someone nearby is repairing a broken wooden bowl with sap and determination. And an old man is carefully sharpening a blade, not because he'll use it soon, but because it keeps his fingers moving. This is Viking insomnia, at its finest. No one gets up and starts doing cartwheels, but they stay just active enough to keep blood flowing and spirits intact. Some drink warm mead. Others whisper stories or sing lullabies so soft they barely make it past their lips. A woman near the door mutters a prayer to the house gods, flicking ash from a small carved token. Now for your quirky tidbit. Some Viking families used this middle-of-the-night wait period to tell dreams not just for fun, but as a serious spiritual practice. They believed dreams had meaning, and that winter dreams, in particular, were powerful, possibly because you were cold enough to hallucinate slightly. Either way, you might wait to find someone whispering about ravens, snowstorms, or a fish with your grandfather's voice. Historians still argue whether this two-phase sleep was a cultural practice or just forced by environmental necessity, but either way, it worked. It kept people from growing numb inside and out. You move again. You check the woodpile. You gently wake a boy who's supposed to feed the goats. You help an elder adjust her wool tent for better draft protection. You nibble a bit of dried apple and chew it slowly, feeling the sugar nudge you back toward wakefulness. There's no dramatic rush. No schedule. But everything is done with purpose. And that's the rhythm of winter survival. Move a little, sleep a little, tend to someone, warm your hands, repeat. Eventually, you feel that familiar heaviness again. That pull toward your straw mat, your warm neighbor, your personal spot in the communal pile. You slip back into the woolen tent. The air inside is musty, close, and oddly comforting. You wrap your cloak tighter. You nestle into the hollow left by your earlier sleep. And slowly, as the fire crackles and the wind outside sings through the thatch, you drift again. This time not just because you're tired, but because you've earned it. You wake in the half-dark again, and for a moment, you're not sure what time it is. But time doesn't mean much in Viking winter. The sun, when it appears at all, rises like it regrets the effort, skimming the edge of the sky for an hour or two before calling it a day. Light, real light, is a luxury. So you judge the hour by breath, by warmth, by the stirring of bodies around you. You rub your face, and your fingers come away damp. Not sweat condensation. Your own breath has frosted your hair during the night. The tips of your lashes are rimmed with tiny white crystals. You look like you were kissed by a very confused snow fairy. Someone near you mutters, cold enough to freeze Thur's hammer off, and you all chuckle softly. The joke's old, the laughter even older. You sit up, cloak wrapped around your shoulders, and look around. The longhouse is quiet sleeping, but restless. People roll over. Someone coughs. The hearth glows dully, a lazy eye watching the world. You don't want to move, but you must. So you ease out of the sleeping pile, tug on your boots which are somehow colder inside than they were outside, and head toward the fire. The air bites. It bites hard. This is the kind of cold that doesn't just surround you, it enters you. It finds the weak spots, the bit of neck left exposed, the ankle between leggings, the place on your wrist where your mitten shifted in the night. And yet, you move through it. Not because you're brave, because you're practiced. You stoke the coals gently, adding a bit of birch bark. It catches quickly, flaring up with a sudden snap and hiss. The light is gold and fleeting, but it's enough. It makes the room look softer. You sit beside it, hands extended, watching the warmth creep back into your fingers. Then you sigh. Deeply. Because despite all this, the layers, the fire, the fat stewed barley, the shared body heat, you're still cold. Deeply cold. The kind of cold that doesn't hurt, exactly, but lingers in your bones. And it has started to feel normal. And that, perhaps, is the strangest part of winter survival. You don't beat the cold. You become it. You learn to live alongside it, like an unwanted guest who sleeps on your couch and eats all your dried fish. And yet, in the stillness, you dream of spring. Not in a loud way. Oh. In full-color fantasies of flowers and sun. No, your dreams are smaller, softer. You dream of the smell of wet earth, of the sound of dripping snow, of grass that doesn't crunch underfoot. You dream of walking without 4 layers of wool, of loosening your belt, because you're full, not because you need more room for another faux wrap. You dream of sun on your eyelids, of breezes that don't cut like knives, of warmth that doesn't come from a stew pot or a fire. And you're not alone in this. Everyone around you dreams in this way. Even the elders who pretend they've grown used to the cold. Even the children who have never known a winter without it. Even the goats. Especially the goats. Here's a known historical fact. Norse mythology is full of imagery tied to winter snow, ice, fire, storms, but it also carries constant undercurrents of seasonal cycles. The idea that dark is followed by light. Death by life. Cold by warmth. Ragnarok ends, but new life springs from its ashes. Even in myth, hope is seasonal. Someone nearby starts humming a lullaby. It's low, breathy, almost a whisper. Not a performance, just a habit, an old tune used to lull babies and chase away silence. You hum along. You don't know the words. Doesn't matter. The song remembers you. Now here's your quirky tidbit. In the far north, some Viking families painted tiny suns or spirals on the inside of their wooden wall, symbols of warmth and continuity. Not decoration, but reminders. The sun returns, they'd whisper. Always. Historians still debate whether these symbols were magical protections, early calendars, or just stubborn optimism in charcoal form. But either way, they're there. Scratched into door frames, etched into bedposts, hope, carved in wood. You sit there, thinking about that, about how a people so tough, so flint-faced and frostbitten, still made room for tiny symbols of light. That maybe survival wasn't just about staying warm, but about staying hopeful. The fire crackles again. Someone adds a log. The smell of toasted resin fills the room. You look across the longhouse. People are waking. Quietly. Sleepily. A child has curled into their mother's cloak like a small animal burrowing for spring. The old man who snores like a drowning ox has sat up and is rubbing his chest, probably looking for a misplaced rib. And somehow, you're smiling. You don't feel warm. Not exactly. But you feel warmed. There's a difference. The heat might not have reached your toes, but it's curled somewhere behind your ribs, and it helps. So, you get up. You stretch your arms. You roll your shoulders. You know that today will be hard. That the cold will keep biting. That the stew will be thin and the boots will be stiff. But you also know the sun somewhere is beginning its long crawl back. And that's enough. Later, you're perched near the hearth again, a piece of dry bread in one hand, your other warming slowly above the coals. The fire isn't roaring, nothing in Viking winter ever really roars, but it glows, steady and red, like a heartbeat. The others are awake now too, moving slowly in the half-light like bundled shadows. You can hear murmurs, creaking wood, and the soft slap of wool-wrapped feet on the plank floor. But something's shifted. The house isn't just trying to survive the cold anymore. It's fighting something subtler, the silence. It creeps in this time of year, just as dangerous as frost. There's only so much stew and firewood. Only so many chores you can do before the hours stretch thin. So how did the Vikings stay sane during the long, bleak dark? They filled it with sound. It starts quietly. One of the older women, her braids streaked with silver, begins a soft story. Not a saga, exactly, more like a memory wrapped in exaggeration. About a fox who stole her brother's boot. Or maybe it was her brother who was the fox. No one interrupts. Everyone just listens, letting the tale unfold like steam curling into the rafters. You smile. This is how it's always been done. The Vikings told stories the way other people breathe, constantly and with great flair. Heroic deeds, tragic losses, dumb mistakes, and animals who talk. The longhouse was their theatre. The fire was their spotlight. You shift your legs, and someone nudges your elbow. He grins, then begins a tale of his own about a winter so cold the ale froze in the mugs and had to be chewed. Everyone chuckles. Someone snorts. A child gasps with delight. Even the goats seem amused. This is no accident. Storytelling wasn't just for fun, it was a tool, a form of heat. a shield against despair. When it's dark for 20 hours a day, you light whatever fires you can, even if it's with words. Now comes the mainstream fact. The Viking oral tradition was one of the richest in medieval Europe. Before writing came to the north, everything history, law, values, humour was passed down by mouth. Skalds, poets held enormous power. Some were even attached to kings, paid not with coin, but with gifts and glory. But you don't need a skald to keep your spirits up tonight. A boy begins to hum, and soon his sister joins in. The tune is familiar, a lilting lullaby, probably older than the house itself. It has no clear words anymore, just soft sounds passed through generations like warmth in cupped hands. You hum along, not because you know it, but because you want to. The sound vibrates in your chest, filling the space around the fire with something gentler than heat. Connection. Nearby, someone taps rhythmically on the side of a wooden bowl with a spoon. It's not music exactly, but it keeps time. Someone else whistles, off-key but enthusiastic. The girl adds a clap or two. And just like that, you have a Viking band. It's terrible, but it's wonderful. Here's your quirky historical tidbit. Some Viking families kept rattles made from deer hooves or carved bone not for babies, but for ritual winter noise-making. The idea was to scare away evil spirits or winter demons by shaking and banging and singing until the silence left you alone. Some historians believe these traditions fed into seasonal feasts, like Jol Yule, where noise, feasting and drinking weren't just celebrations, they were acts of spiritual resistance. And in this house tonight, with nothing but spoons and stories and cracked voices, you're doing exactly the same thing. Historians still argue whether winter storytelling was a formal ritual or a byproduct of boredom, but in either case it worked. And still does. You notice how different people contribute. The young offer excitement. The elders offer wisdom. The tired ones nod along. And the grumpy ones? Even they crack a smile eventually. You add your own story, a small one. About the time the stew pot exploded because someone dropped a hot rock in it. It was you. Obviously. But you leave that part out. The others laugh. You feel lighter. The walls still groan with cold. The wind still whines through the rafters. But inside, around the hearth, there's warmth that doesn't come from flame. Laughter, rhythm, and shared memory. All of it stirred into the air like soup in a pot that never quite empties. You lean back against the wall and let the sounds wash over you. There are no instruments, no polished performances, just voices. Tired voices, sincere voices, human ones. In the coldest places, that's what keeps people going. Not just the furs or the food, but the stories. And as the night deepens again, you realize something. You don't feel quite so cold anymore. You're drowsy now, but not ready for sleep. Not quite. The longhouse has quieted again, though the embers still glow and a dog sighs in its dreams. You're cocooned in layers of wool and laughter, and yet like every night someone's got cold feet. Specifically yours. You wiggle your toes inside their wrappings, then slowly press them against the leg of your unfortunate neighbour. She groans. You grin. It's the oldest Viking trick in the book. Because when the fire burns low, and the blankets lose their heat, it's toes that suffer first. It's not dramatic, not frostbite or screaming pain. It's just a slow, creeping cold that makes you curl your feet tighter, then tighter still, until you're shaped like a spoon and slightly less flexible. But you're not the only one. All across the longhouse, feet are shuffling. People adjust their cloaks, tuck in corners, pull small fur bundles closer. Children get wedged between adults, older folks press against dogs, and anyone with warm feet becomes suddenly very popular. Now for a mainstream fact. Vikings knew how to insulate with what they had. They used straw stuffed in socks, layered linen wraps, and sheepskin boots, often lined with wool or even dried moss. Anything to trap body heat, especially at the extremities. Tonight, you dig around at the foot of your bedding and pull out your secret weapon, a bundle of straw wrapped in cloth. It crinkles as you shove it down by your ankles. Doesn't sound impressive, does it? It's a game changer. Dry straw holds heat, absorbs moisture, and, if you're lucky, doesn't itch too badly. Beside you, a child curls up with their feet tucked into their grandmother's lap. She grunts, tugs her cloak tighter around them both, and gives the kid a pat without looking. No words needed. Just old instincts. At the far side of the room, someone wraps their calves in a fur that once belonged to a wolf. Another person, likely someone's uncle, shuffles around with what looks like a stuffed sock tied to each foot. You can't tell if it's genius or madness, but the clear champions of foot warming tonight are the animals. The dog near the hearth has become a four-legged furnace. One of the cats has slunk into a basket of laundry and is purring loud enough to be considered central heating. Even the goateus, the indoor goateus lying at someone's feet like a warm, slightly smelly footrest. You watch as people reach for them without hesitation. A hand on warm fur. A face press against a woolly side. It's not just warmth, it's comfort. Now for your quirky historical tidbit. In some Viking households, dogs and cats had names not just for affection, but for invocation. People whispered their names when they were cold or lonely, believing the animals brought luck or warmth. A kind of Norse superstition meets cuddle therapy. Historians still argue whether animals were truly indoor companions during Viking times or mostly tolerated necessities, but most agree, during winter, if it had fur and didn't bite, it got to stay. You press your feet against your straw bundle and sigh. It's working. Slowly, the pins and needles fade. The numbness lifts. You're not toasty, exactly, but you're climbing out of the danger zone. Then, in true Viking fashion, someone announces without moving that their feet are definitely about to fall off. Everyone groans in solidarity. One woman suggests putting feet in the soup pot after the stew is gone. Everyone laughs. No one says it's a mad idea. You share tricks, quietly. Tucking coals into clay pots. Wearing mittens on feet in an emergency. Sitting on your own boots before putting them on in the morning. Someone swears by sleeping with onions in their socks. No one questions it. The boy across from you, still awake, begins quietly reciting a little rhyme about cold toes. It's not clever, but it's oddly soothing. Like a lullaby from someone who knows the war is real and the enemy is your own feet. You lie back now, feet warm enough to forget. You pull the cloak over your nose. You blink slowly. And you realize that this moment is exactly why the Vikings survived winters like this. Because they didn't do it alone. They didn't rely on just fire or food or furs. They relied on each other and the warmth of shared space, the trade of tricks, the presence of animals, and yes, even the occasional willingness to let someone else's frozen feet touch your shin. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't glamorous, but it was enough. You tuck your feet deeper into the straw. A dog shuffles closer. A hand reaches across the bedding and tightens the fur at your shoulder. You close your eyes, and the cold stays outside. For now. You wait to the sound of something heavy being dragged. It's still dark, of course, because the sun in Viking winter has the work ethic of a sleepy bear. But inside the longhouse, a new rhythm has begun. It's the work shuffle. You sit up, joints stiff as old hinges, and blink at the flicker of firelight. Around you, others are already moving, pulling on cloaks, lifting bundles of wood, wrapping their hands in wool, and muttering about the day ahead. Because here's the thing, you don't wait out a Viking winter. You move through it. Stillness is a luxury reserved for the dead or for rich people in warmer countries. So you rise. Stretch. Yawn like a bear who didn't hibernate nearly long enough. Then you wrap your cloak tight and join the others in the slow, steady dance of winter chores. Begin with wood. Always the wood. The stack by the hearth has shrunk overnight, and you need more. So out you go into the frozen morning. The door flap is stiff, nearly iced shut, and requires the combined effort of you and a woman who could probably bench press an ox. Together you heave it open and step into a world that crunches underfoot. Snow blankets everything. Thick. White. Heavy. The air bites your nose immediately. Your breath curls up like a ghost escaping. But you don't stop. You can't. You head to the lean-to, where the firewood is stored. Most of it is damp, or frozen. Some is frozen to the wall. You take what you can and stack it in your arms, ignoring the cold burning into your fingertips through your gloves. This is how warmth is earned. Back inside, you dump the wood beside the hearth and immediately start arranging it to dry. Someone else is hauling water slowly from the stream outside, which is more like a trickle beneath a blanket of ice. Another person is pounding grain into flour with a stone. Everyone moves. Everyone contributes. Because Viking winters aren't just survived by layering and luck. They're survived by momentum. Now here's a mainstream fact. Viking households relied heavily on daily, repetitive tasks to keep everyone alive. Even in winter, jobs needed doing: water hauling, animal care, food preparation, mending, carving, weaving, sewing, maintaining tools, and tending to the all-important fire. The key was that most of these jobs could be done indoors or close enough to dash back inside without losing a toe. You settle beside the older woman who's repairing a boot. The hands are wrinkled, her fingers bent like old branches, but she works fast. Stitch, pull. Stitch, pull. You offer to help, and she snorts. Don't stab yourself this time. Rude. There. Soon, your hands are busy. You're patching a tear in someone's tunic with rough thread and practiced fingers. It's not elegant, but it'll hold. And while you work, the room hums with quiet conversation. People exchange jokes, swap calls, tell stories, whistle, tap rhythmically on wooden bowls. Some even walk laps inside the longhouse to warm their blood. And here's your quirky historical tidbit. Some Viking families kept small balance poles inside their homes during winter, not for carrying buckets, but for exercise. Children would walk along them to pass time and build balance. Sort of like the first indoor fitness trend minus the yoga pants. Historians still argue whether these poles were truly for exercise or merely makeshift playthings, but either way, they helped keep people moving, and moving kept them warm. Eventually, you shift to another task: pounding dried herbs. You crush them with a stone pestle in a shallow bowl, releasing the scent of dried thyme, fennel, and something that might be garlic or just very old onion. It's oddly satisfying. The rhythm. The sound. The fact that your hands are doing something useful. You look around. Everyone is in motion. Not frantically. Not loudly. Just constantly. Like the longhouse itself is a living organism, each person a part of its slow, pulsing heartbeat. Even the animals help. The dog keeps watch by the door. The cat keeps mice from the grain. The goat mostly eats things it shouldn't, but it does produce warmth. And opinions. Someone nearby begins twisting straw into a new mattress pad. Someone else is melting snow for the next batch of washing water. Every action feeds the others. Every movement fights the cold. And slowly, your body warms. Your toes unclench. Your nose stops running. Your fingers feel like your own again. It's not from sitting. It's not from fire. It's because you've been doing. You sit down beside a boy weaving wool cords, his fingers flying over the strands like his racing time. He grins without looking up. Warm yet. You nod. Almost. He smirks, then keep going. It's not a rebuke. It's wisdom. Because winter, in the Viking world, isn't something you wait through. It's something you push through. With hands and feet and laughter and sweat. With movement that keeps the blood hot and the spirits higher than they'd otherwise rise. You return to your stitching. The fire pops. Someone sings softly. A draft sneaks under the door, but it doesn't feel quite so cold anymore. You're part of the engine now, and the longhouse moves forward with you in it. Later in the afternoon, if you can call this dim grey haze afternoon, you step outside again, just for a moment. The snow squeaks beneath your boots. That's how cold it is, squeaky snow. You exhale, watching the fog of your breath float like a lost soul above the white. The sky is the colour of old wool. You wouldn't know where the ground ends and heaven begins if not for the line of dark pine trees in the distance. You look around and think, how is anything still alive? Then you glance down at your own hands, red and chapped but still moving. That's how. Because the truth is, Vikings didn't wait for better weather. They didn't get snow days. They got snow duties. Take the animals, for example. They're as much a part of the household as anyone else. You trudge to the small outbuilding that barely counts as a barn. It's more of a straw-draped lean-to. Find the goats huddled inside, steaming slightly in the cold. One sneezes. Another eyes you like you're late with its dinner. You mutter an apology and toss them a bundle of hay. They accept it with great suspicion. You top off the ice-crusted water trough, break apart frozen clumps with a stick, and shiver as a draft works its way down your back. Then it's back inside first, because the wind has teeth, and your boots are barely keeping up. Inside the longhouse, the work continues. Someone is scraping hide, stretching and curing a stiff piece of deer skin, pulling at it like it insulted their mother. Another person is twisting wool fibers into thread, fingers moving so quickly it makes you dizzy. You return to your seat by the hearth, remove your gloves, and rub your hands. Here's the thing about Viking winter chores. They're not just for survival. They're for sanity. You can only nap so much. You can only eat so many bowls of turnip and barf stew. At some point, the mind starts to drift. And when it does, idle hands aren't just cold, they're dangerous. So, the secret. Keep moving. That's your mainstream fact of the day. Archaeologists have found ample evidence of domestic productivity even during the harshest seasons. Textiles, wood carving, leatherwork, tool sharpening, and bone carving all took place indoors during the dark months. Winter wasn't dead time. It was a crafting season. You pick up a piece of driftwood and begin whittling. Not for anything important, just a spoon. But your hands are busy, and your mind settles. You carve while others work around you. A girl sings a counting song while she braids flax. A man nearby is working on a broken sled runner, muttering softly in frustration. The dog snores beside the hearth, twitching in a dream about chasing something important. And then, suddenly, a burst of laughter. A boy just tried on a sock so big it nearly swallows him whole. He flaps the woolly ends and declares it a tunic. Everyone laughs, the kind of laugh that rises like heat in the room, lighting faces in the firelight. You smile. Not because the joke was funny, but because you needed to smile. Now here's your quirky tidbit. Some Viking families created mock tasks for children during winter, not just to keep them busy, but to teach through imitation. Tiny weaving frames. Small knives dulled for safety. Spoons made only to be carved again. The cold wasn't just endured, it was used. Historians still argue whether these activities were more educational or just desperate attempts to preserve adult sanity, but either way, they worked. They gave the children rhythm. Verse. A sense of importance in the great family machinery. As the day drags on, these longhouse becomes a kind of living workshop. Quiet. Yes. Slow, certainly. But alive. Someone sets up a suspended rack near the fire, drying damp mittens and cloaks. Another is making a new broom from bound twigs. The girl is carefully tightening the strap on her father's snowshoes, preparing for a trek tomorrow. There's no yelling. No rush. Just the ongoing hum of survival, stitched together with movement and shared space. You stretch your back and realize you're warm again. Not because of the fire. Not because of your clothes. But because you've been doing. You've carried wood, fed animals, carved a spoon, laughed at bad jokes, and hummed through half a verse of an old lullaby while threading twine. You've lived the day. And in Viking winter, that's the win. You sit down beside the elder woman who's sewing a patch onto a tunic that's clearly seen 3 generations of elbows. She looks over your spoon, nods once, and says, "Still better than your stew." You both laugh. It's probably true. The fire crackles, a dog shifts, and outside, the wind changes pitch just a bit. Lower now. Less like a howl, more like a sigh. You look around the longhouse, at the hands that move, the lips that sing, the quiet warmth in every small act. And you realize that this ordinary, repetitive, humble labor is what keeps the cold out. Not because it changes the temperature, but because it reminds you that you're not frozen yet. You wake again to coughing, not dramatic, just dry, scratchy, the kind of cough winter hands out like party favors. You roll over, feel your shoulder crack, and decide it's time to rise. The longhouse is dim. The fire's faded to a sleepy red eye. But around it, someone's been busy. You blink at the strange contraption by the hearth, a low clay pot filled with coals, glowing faintly beneath a mesh of blackened stones. It's radiating just enough warmth to toast the dog's nose, and has clearly claimed it as personal property. You shuffle over and hold, your hands above it. Not too close, it's one of those ember pots, and they have two moods, gentle heat or sudden burn. This is Viking midnight ingenuity at work. Because sometimes the fire burns low. Sometimes the wind sneaks under the wall again. And sometimes you just want heat that doesn't come with a face full of smoke. So, like many Norse families, yours has turned to the makeshift heater. This particular one was made from a hollowed chunk of clay lined with ash. Others use flat iron pans, bronze kettles, or even heated stones tucked into boxes lined with moss. Primitive? Maybe, but also clever and effective. You lean in, careful not to melt your eyebrows, and sigh. Your fingers thank you. Your soul thanks you. Here's your mainstream fact. Vikings knew how to preserve and transport heat using stones, embers, and clever containment. Heated rocks were pulled from the fire and placed in pits beneath beds, or wrapped in leather and carried under cloaks. Some homes even had double-layer hearths, where warmth lingered long after the flames died down. But back to tonight's invention. The ember pot isn't alone. Someone else has rigged a stone slab upright by the fire. It's been absorbing heat for hours, and now acts like a radiator, slowly warming the air. A child is sleeping beside it, curled up like a kitten. Snot. You add a few fresh chips of pine to the coals, and the scent of sap rises sweet and sharp. The fire gives a contented pop, and you smile. You're not the only one still awake. Across the room, two men are fiddling with a basket filled with hot stones and sand. One nudges it toward the sleeping area with his boot. It's crude and kind of looks like a trap, but it's working. You feel the heat creeping through the floorboards like a slow, invisible animal. And now, for your quirky historical tidbit, in some Norse regions, people made sleeping trough shallow dugouts lined with fur and filled with heated rocks. They went common, and likely, only appeared in the coldest parts of Scandinavia. But the idea was simple. Trap the heat where you lie. Like building a little hot spring in dirt. Historians still argue whether these were widespread traditions or just isolated cleverness, but the principle of heat trapping shows up all over Viking culture in bedding, clothing, hearth design, and even household layout. You settle near the ember pot again, and notice someone has placed a carved wooden lid over it. Smart. It holds in the heat just a little longer and protects small fingers from becoming toast. You consider borrowing it for your own bed, but the dog lifts his head and gives you the look. Fie. He wins. Elsewhere, a woman is adding charcoal pellets to a small iron container. Not for cooking, for warmth. She tucks it into a wool-wrapped pouch and places it inside a child's bedding. The child grunts, rolls over, and immediately falls deeper into sleep. You make a mental note to copy her tomorrow. Or maybe just steal her container. It's funny, really. All this fuss, all this work. For what? A few extra degrees of warmth. Yeah. Because in Viking winter, 3 degrees is the difference between comfort and misery. Between waking with toes and waking with regrets. And the methods may seem silly: burnt stones, ember baskets, pots of ash, but every trick matters. Every bit of heat counts. You learn to respect the tiniest margin, the smallest fire, the gentlest warmth. You sit down beside the wall and press your back against a fur-lined mat. Someone hands you a hot stone wrapped in cloth. You thank them with a nod and hold it against your chest. It hums through your bones like a lullaby. You can feel your breath deepen. You remember last year's fire basket experiment. The one that smoked everyone half to death and made the goat dizzy. Progress. The longhouse is quiet again now. The embers glow. The dog snores. Someone mutters in their sleep. You curl your fingers around the warm stone and settle in. And in this moment, you realize that cleverness, not comfort, was the true Norse luxury. Because surviving winter wasn't just about being tough. It was about being resourceful. The wind has changed again. You can hear it even before you open your eyes, the slow, rising whine as it snakes through the thatch, pressing like fingers against the longhouse walls. It's colder today. Sharper. The kind of cold that bites your bones before it even touches your skin. You stir, curl deeper into the furs, and try not to think about the chores waiting for you. But someone moves near the hearth. A spark crackles. A child yawns. The day has begun whether you're ready or not. And this day, like every day, starts with a ritual. Not one written in stone, not one sung by skalds, but a quiet, spiritual thing all the same. Because in the Viking world, survival wasn't just physical. It was sacred. You rise, wrap your cloak around you like armor, and pad toward the hearth, where someone has already begun to stoke this fire. Smoke curls lazily up through the smoke hole. Light flickers against the wooden beams, illuminating the carved symbols above the mantel. You know them well. Hammer shapes, sun spirals, animal tracks, small notches in the wood. This isn't decoration, it's belief. Because even though the Vikings were known for strength and steel and ships that split the sea, they were also people who whispered to fire and gave thanks for heat. You settle beside the hearth and rest your hand briefly on a small, blackened idol carved from driftwood. It's meant to represent the, or perhaps just the spirit of the hearth itself. The distinction doesn't matter. What matters is that you ask it nicely to help the fire catch. And it does. Here's your mainstream fact. Many Viking households had household gods, known as Landfter or Husfra, spirits tied to place, fire, food, or fortune. Offerings were made. Prayers whispered. These spirits weren't grand, like Odin or Freyja, but personal, like old friends, who watched over the hearth and home. This morning, someone scatters a few grains of barley into the fire, a tiny offering. Someone else quietly pours a drop of mead onto the coals. It sizzles sweetly. There's no ceremony, just routine. The kind passed down through habit, not law. You help hang a pot above the fire and stir in dried vegetables. As the stew bubbles, someone across the longhouse begins humming a deep, slow tune that feels more like breath than music. You recognize it, a midwinter song, old and wordless. It makes your skin prickle, not with cold, but with something else. Memory, maybe. You join in. So do others. Just softly. Like a blanket being pulled up over the soul. Now for your quirky historical tidbit. During the coldest weeks of winter around Jul, Vikings practiced bult, or seasonal offerings. Some were large feasts, with livestock and ale. Others were small and intimate, simple tokens given to fire, earth, and ancestors. And some families even told riddles or poems to the fire, believing warmth responded to cleverness. Historians still argue whether these smaller rituals were pagan leftovers or domestic inventions, but either way, the hearth was treated with reverence. Not just as a tool, but as a presence. You ladle out bowls of steaming stew, hand one to an elder, and notice the tiny sun symbol etched into the bowl's rim. Another reminder that light always returns. Even if it's slow, even if it comes one spoonful at a time. Outside, the wind howls again. But inside, there's warmth. You sit. You eat. You whisper thanks to the flame, not because it hears you, necessarily, but because you need to say it. Because warmth is a gift. And like all gifts, it demands gratitude. The girl crosses the room and hangs a garland of dried herbs above the door. Not for flavor, for blessing. Mugwort for protection. Juniper for clarity. Birch for cleansing. You smile. And you remember something the elder once told you. When the cold touches your body, fight it. When it touches your spirit, bliss it back. So that's what you do. You feed the fire. You sing a tune. You say a name softly, the name of someone gone. And you wrap your cloak tighter, not out of fear, but because the cold is just a season. And seasons pass. The warmth tonight isn't only from stew or stone. It's from ritual, from meaning, from the belief quiet and flickering like the fire itself that something watches over you in the dark. You don't know if it's or your ancestors, or just the stubborn hope of your own heart. But either way you're warm. And that's enough. The wind finally dies down. Not entire light still murmurs at the edges of the longhouse like a moody spirit, but the violent howls of the last few nights have softened. It's a different kind of quiet now. Not peace exactly, but pause. You sit by the hearth with a clay cup of lukewarm broth, watching the last slivers of daylight struggle across the threshold. The smoke hole glows faintly. It's still cold. Everything is still cold. But somehow, it feels less impossible. And that's when you notice it. Your mug. It's frozen. Not solid, but there's a thin layer of slush forming along the inside rim. Your broth a moment ago, steaming, has become a Viking snow cone. You laugh. Softly. Because what else can you do? It's not unusual. Even the ale freezes. People in the longhouse have begun using small knives to cut their mead into slivers. Others chew it like a popsicle. The children are delighted. The adults are resigned. And someone's trying to use frozen goat's milk as a weapon, which seems culturally appropriate. That's Viking winter humor. If it's frozen, it's funny. Because if you didn't laugh, you might shatter like the broth. Here's your mainstream fact. Viking winters were cold enough that fermented drinks mead, ale, even weak beer could freeze indoors, especially in longhouses without central fire pits or with poor insulation. The alcohol content wasn't always high enough to prevent freezing, especially after being watered down during storage. To combat it, people kept drinks close to the fire, or under their cloaks, or in leather pouches stuffed under blankets. Some even drank them hot, heated gently over coals. The original Norse mulled drink, if you will, without the oranges or cinnamon, but with a certain desperation that made it spicy enough. Now for your quirky historical tidbit. In some households, snow was used deliberately to preserve food, sure, but also for making cool treats for children during feast days. Crushed snow mixed with honey, berries, or curds. Not quite sorbet, but it did the trick. And during the darkest months, even small joys were monumental. Historians still argue whether this snow and honey mix was a widespread treat or a regional luxury, but archaeological finds in burial sites suggest that sweetened snow was offered to the gods during winter festivals. Even offerings, it seems, enjoyed dessert. You sip the now slushy broth. Tastes like survival, bland, warm-ish, oddly comforting. Someone else lifts a cup to toast the end of the windstorm. A communal cheer rises, quiet but spirited. And that's when it happens. Someone opens the door. Just a crack. Just long enough to let in a sliver of air so cold it makes your teeth hum. But also a smell. Earth. Not fresh grass or flowers, of course. Not yet. But damp soil, melted snow, the faint, gritty scent of dirt returning to life. You breathe it in like a treasure. Around the room, others notice too. Faces tilt toward the doorway like sunflowers, eyes blinking. It's still freezing. Still dark. But it's a different kind of cold. The edge of winter. You move closer to the door and peek outside. The snow is still thick, but you can see where it's pulling away from the base of the trees. The wind has shifted direction. A patch of roof is shedding icicles like tears. You smile. And you're not alone. Because this is how it happens. First the drink freezes. Then the drink unfreezes. Then the world does. Someone calls out a joke about finally getting to drink ale instead of chew it. Someone else proposes a feast when the snow melts completely, even if it's just boiled turnips and air. The child asks if spring is here yet. A woman answers, almost. You return to the fire, place your cup on a flat stone to thaw, and stretch your hands toward the coals. You're not warm yet. Not truly. But the warmth feels closer. Not just around you, but ahead of you. You glance at the people around the hearth. Every one of them has survived something. Every one of them has shivered, worked, sung, mended, laughed, cried, and kept moving. That's what makes you strong. Not the fur. Not the food. Not even the fire. The friendship. Because when the ale freezes, you share it. When the soup runs thin, you pass the bowl. When someone's blanket is too short, you offer your shoulder. That's the real insulation. The one that holds back not just the cold, but the loneliness, emptiness, the slow erosion of hope that winter can bring. You pull your cloak tighter, not from fear now but from readiness. Soon, the snow will crack. Soon, the river will run again. Soon, the first green leaf will push through frozen mud like a whisper. And you'll still be here. Because you knew how to laugh. Even when the ale froze. The snow is melting. Not fast, not in a dramatic, cinematic rush. But here and there at the corners of the longhouse, beneath the overhangs, in the footprints outside the door it's beginning. Little runnels of water trickle along frozen grooves. Icicles drip steadily, forming puddles that glisten in the morning light. You step outside and hear it. The unmistakable sound of drip, drip, drip. The world is thawing. You pull your cloak tighter not because you're cold, but because your body has grown used to winter's weight. Everything feels lighter now. The air, the sky, even your steps. You squint toward the horizon, and though the trees are still there and the wind is still sharp, there's something in the quality of the light that says, we've made it. Inside the longhouse, things feel different too. People are moving with more purpose. Voices are louder, more animated. The elder who rarely left her bedding all winter is now outside, poking at the woodpile like she's ready to build a palace. Children run between the snow patches, shouting about worms, which apparently have returned. You laugh. Because everything returns. The day is for cleaning, and not just the practical kind. You help carry out cloaks that haven't seen sunlight in weeks. You shake out bedding. You scrub the longhouse floor with melted snow and pine needles. The place smells of wet wood and stubborn effort. Everyone's busy. Everyone's happy to be. Someone's repairing the goat pen. Someone else is digging through the storage pit to see what hasn't spoiled. You spot a wheel of cheese, suspiciously soft. Best not ask. You help move a bench back toward the wall, and, beneath it you find a single green shootany, brave, pushing up through the packed earth like it didn't get the memo about ice. It's just a weed. But it might as well be a miracle. Here's your mainstream fact. Viking winters ended slowly, and spring was just as dangerous as the cold itself. Melting snow meant floods. Weak ice led to accidents. Stored food spoiled easily in fluctuating temperatures. And yet, spring was celebrated with bonfires, songs, rituals, and the cautious unrolling of sleeves. And now for your quirky tidbit. Some Viking communities welcomed spring by holding a mud feast not as messy as it sounds. It meant cooking the first uncovered roots from the softening ground and sharing them in a symbolic meal, even if they were bitter, small, or still half-frozen. They ate together, laughed together, and whispered thanks to the earth for not giving up on them. Historians still argue whether this was a universal tradition or simply local lore, but accounts of it appear in enough folk records to make one thing clear: the melt was meaningful. You help hang a wet blanket by the fire. The smoke hole is wide open now, letting in beams of light. The sun outside doesn't just illuminate, it warms. You feel it on your hands as you stand near the entrance. You think back just a few weeks ago when your hair froze in your sleep. When your stew turned to slush mid-sentence. When you wore 4 layers to dream of being warm. And now here you are. With dirt under your nails and sun on your face. You've survived. Not just with fire or fur, but with the small, everyday decisions to keep going. To patch the cloak. To sing the song. To tell the joke. To carry the wood. To share the last crust of bread. To let someone's cold toes press into your leg and not shove them away. You step outside again, just for a moment. The air smells like meltwater and moss. You can hear a raven cackling in the distance. A child runs past, trailing a bit of linen like a victory flag. The goat is chewing on something it probably shouldn't. You close your eyes and let the warmth settle, not just into your skin, but into your memory. Because when next winter comes, and it will come, you'll remember this. The first drip, the first patch of brown earth, the first laugh that echoed without being muffled by snow. And that memory. That's your blanket. That's your fire. That's your strength. You step back inside, and someone hands you a fresh bowl of stew made with spring herbs, pulled fresh from under the snow. It's bitter. It's earthy. It's perfect. Because it tastes like hope. And now you lie back. The longhouse is quiet again, but it's a different kind of quiet. Not the silence of frost and fear, but the softness of peace. The fire glows low. The walls are dry. A dog sighs beside you. A breeze slips through the rafters, not a draft, just a whisper of the world outside, no longer howling. You pull the fur up to your chin and close your eyes. You've survived the coldest nights. You've walked through wind and snow, shared stories and soup, sown patches, stacked wood, whispered to fires, and sang old songs into the smoke. Every hour, every task, every warm body pressed beside your sat was its own kind of magic. Quiet magic. Real magic. Outside, spring stretches her arms and yawns, not rushing. Just waking. And you. You don't need to rush either. Let your breath slow. Let the weight of the blanket sink into your bones. Let the last thoughts of the day melt like snow off the roof. There's nothing left to do. No more to carry. No cold to guard against. Just rest. In this house of wood, this cocoon of warmth, this moment suspended gently between seasons, you are safe. You are warm. And you are home. Sleep now. The fire will keep watch.